We're up to halacha tes, and halacha zayin and ches, or actually the rest of the whole parak was basically talking about, just to review, ways Talmidei Chachamim act. It spoke about how you have to eat, right? How you have to conduct yourself in business, how you have to speak. And number 8, we learned how you have to walk. Okay. And in 9, we get to dress. So 9 starts off by saying, Malbush Talmud Chacham, Malbush Na'ev Enaki. The Talmud Chacham has very, very clean, literally, naki. Clothing has to be clean. Okay, you can't walk around with dirty clothing. V'asur lo sheyimatzeh bebigdo kesem o shamnunis kiyotze bahen. Okay, you can't walk around with ketchup stains, all right, on your nice white shirt. Very, very big no-no. That's one. In fact, there is a Gemara that says that someone who's found, a Talmud Chacham is found with a stain on his shirt is chayiv misa. That's what the Gemara says in Shabbos. But okay, I'm not sure how literal to take it. But
Don't you
anyways,
think it's talking about a specific type of stain?
it says ravav, like a grease stain, something like that. Yeah, I mean, the Gemara does make a difference between, like, if it's like wax or fat or something. But obviously, if he's a butcher, then he's supposed to have stains. But we're talking about a Talmud Chacham who's not working. So that's why he's got to have a nice white shirt. Now we're going to get to an important point that not everybody heeds. It is absolutely wrong to walk around with a flashy golden bekisha to attract attention. All right, that's a no-no. And the other hand, you can't wear peasant clothing. Of course, it's an embarrassment. You have to walk around in nice, plain yeshiva clothing. Nothing flashy like yellow bekishas with strimals. And on the other hand, you can't have peasant clothing. So you got to be right in the middle there somewhere. White shirt and black pants, just to play it safe. And when it comes to, how to tuck your shirt in or your cloak. So the Rambam obviously takes this from a Gemara in Bava Basra. Daf Nun Zayin V'lo b'sar nir mitachas madav ela bigdei hapishtan hakalm biyoser she'osin b'mitzrayim. Right, you can't see, right, the point of clothing, and we wouldn't know this today by walking around, but I guess there was a time that the point of clothing is actually to cover your skin. That's what it's there. So you can't have anything showing, not even if you wear like really, really white clothing, like today, for example, like a silk white shirt with that you're not wearing an undershirt, so you could see right through and you see your chest. Okay, so that's not a good thing, right? Like the way they would do I guess, with fine linen from Egypt. And you can't have clothes that drag down to the floor. That's also not good. That's called big degase haruach. Haughty people ela ad akevo, only until his akev, right? His heels on his feet. Ubeis yad shalo ad rosh ba'osav, until your hands, right, covering your fingers. So the Rambam was very into covering yourself. Okay, taliso, and when it comes to your talis, now we all understand that the word talis doesn't mean what it means today. Back then they had an inner garment and they had an outer garment, right? That's That's how their clothing was. Very, very simple. So they had one for weekdays and they had one for Shabbos. So the Rambam says that you shouldn't like drape over your outer garment because you look like a gase ruach, right? Someone who is haughty. Ela b'Shabbos, except for only on Shabbos. Excuse me. Im ein lo lahachlif. Meaning, if the only time you're allowed to do it is if you only own one, right? We just said that most people had two, but if you only owned one outer tallis, you were allowed to wear it down to the floor if you had nothing else, only on Shabbos. And in the summer, you can't wear shoes, right? It used to be that if your shoes got a hole in it, what do? You don't throw it out, you patch it. And if those patches wore out, you keep on patching your shoes. We don't have disposable shoes like we do today. You just go on Zappos every Monday and Thursday and order new shoes. That's not how it worked. So the Rambam is not a fan, okay, of tattered shoes. It's not a nice thing. But in the winter, if he couldn't afford it and he needed it to keep his feet warm, right, then that's permitted. Okay, so you could see Rambam is very, very machmir. And again, all these comes from different Gemaras, and the Rambam puts it together nicely in one paragraph. But you see how makpid the Rambam was on walking out like a mensch. Okay, that's the bottom line. Lo yetze mevusam l'shuk. Now we're going to talk about cologne. All right, what was the Rambam's stance on perfume and cologne? So he says no go. All right, you can't go out now. Again, who's he talking to? He's talking to men. You can't go out with cologne, nor with nice smelling clothing, and you can't rub your hair with perfume. However, if you literally anoint yourself with some kind of cologne, or as we today call it, right guard, deodorant, just to antiperspirant so that never let them see you sweat, then that is absolutely okay. But you could see that the problem is with smelling nice. And I didn't see what the commentators say, but I would believe that there is a inyan of Beged Isha, possibly over here, of men adorning themselves similar to women. Like men can't, there's a discussion, if you remember back in Avodah Zarah, we learned about men looking in mirrors or fixing their hair or putting on makeup. There's a certain, things that men have to differentiate themselves from women. We call that Beged Isha. We'll get to that in like 7 years in the Rambam. But anyways, at the rate I'm going. That's the Rambam stance when it comes to deodorant. Yes, cologne, no. Okay. Today, though, they make deodorant that basically, is as good as smelling as cologne. So that takes care of that problem. Now we're going to talk about other things that a Talmud Chacham can't do, and the Rambam lumps this all together. He says, "V'chen lo yetze yechidi balayla." You can't go outside by yourself at night. Anybody remember where this comes from? This is from the story of Yaakov and the angel. The Gemara in Chulin 91 says, "Vayivater Yaakov levado." Right? He made the mistake of being by himself at night, and bam, out comes the Sarah Shel Esav. So that's a no-no to go outside by yourself. In fact, the Gemara in Chulin discusses what a shota is considered. Excuse me, the Gemara in Chagiga, right in the beginning on Daf Beis, talks about what defines a shota. One of the criteria is someone who goes at night by himself. It's a sakana. However, the Rambam says, what if you're walking at night to walk to Yeshivas Eli Melech to learn Charusa? That is fine. Ela im ken hayelo zman kavua latzes bo latamudo. Only if he regularly goes to learn at night, he could go walk by himself. Kol elu mipnei hachashad. Right? The reason, believe it or not, is chashad. Chashad literally means we suspect him of doing something. So a person, again, you have to put yourself a couple thousand years ago, before, in a different world. But if they saw you out at night by yourself, chances are you are up to no good, right? So you were probably going to visit someone who you shouldn't be visiting, and she's going to get you into trouble. So that's why it's not a good look. Even if you're not going, if you're just going to the movies, it's not a good thing because people will be suspicious of you. Okay, that is number 9. Now we're going to get to number 10. This is like, again, more, advice on the appearance and the ways of a Talmud Chacham. Talmud Chacham mechalkel dvarav b'mishpat. So the Rambam is actually, he's quoting a Gemara, and the Gemara is based on a pasuk in Tehillim that says mechalkel dvarav b'mishpat. Someone who, it literally means, the word mechalkel means to give sustenance, right? Like the word for economy in modern day Hebrew is called kalkala. That's what an economy is, because it sustains people. Or machalkel chaim bechesed, right? If you ever wondered what the word machalkel means, that you say 3 times a day, that's where it comes from, kalkala. So someone who is machalkel his affairs b'mishpat, judiciously, right? Someone who is honest with himself, and does everything b'mishpat, right? That is what a Talmud Chacham encompasses. Ochel v'shoteh, okay, regarding his finances, regarding his personal finances for his family. So the way it works is, so he has money, okay, from where? Not from Torah, not from learning, but he has money because we mentioned 100 times already. The Rambam says you got to go out and work. So he's working, he's making money. So, and now, by the way, this Yud, what we're about to learn, is like a shear within itself, because it has a lot of interesting points. It doesn't do justice just to say it in 3 minutes. But basically, it's a question of how does he support his family within the means of the money that he has. So he says, "Ochel v'shotev zanas anshe beso kafima mona v'hatzlachto." He provides for his kids, for his wife, for everyone, depending on his mammon, depending on what he could afford. However, he can't overburden and spend beyond his means. Okay? And in a similar way, the Rambam is comparing it to the law about eating meat. Now, the Rambam here isn't taking a stance on being a vegan, a vegetarian. He's not going that route. He's explaining basically, how do you deal with luxury items that come into your life? For example, meat. Meat is not really, and now meat back then was the most expensive food that exists, right? So you make a certain amount of money. Do you blow it all on meat? Now today we have other examples we're not going to go into about things that you could blow your money on. But the Rambam is talking specifically about what's called basar l'te'avon. So the Rambam takes a stand, and again he gets this whole halacha yud happens to be a Gemara in Chulin Pei Daled, if you remember. At the end of Oso Ves Beno, Gemara goes on a couple pages of Agadata, where it talks about this line exactly. You should only eat based on your appetite. Don't overdo it. Only if you absolutely need to eat meat, it's fine and you could do it. Shenemar, pasuk in Re'eh, ki teveh nafshecha la'achol basar. Okay, that's what the pasuk says. And the Rambam says, again, this is all from Gemara and Chulin, Dayo labari lechol basar me'erev Shabbos le'erev Shabbos. The Rambam is telling us, okay, you could afford it, how often should I, quote unquote, splurge and buy the most expensive item on the menu? Once a week. Okay, Erev Shabbos. One time a week, and that's it. That's for an average person. However, im haya ashir kedei lechol basar b'chol yom nochel. If someone could afford it, then he could buy meat every day. So what's going on here? On the one hand, Rambam says once a week. So what the Rambam is trying to do is tell you not to spend beyond your means. Okay, if you could afford it, then great. And this is the golden rule that the Rambam takes from that same Gemara in Chulin, Daf Pei Daled. He says, here are three things, right, that you should always keep. Ochal Adam Pachas Min HaRoylo. Okay, you should always eat less than you could afford. When it comes to food items, okay, eat less. Even though you could afford it, just eat less. That's one. According to what he could afford. Again, just take it easy on the food. The yilbash karoyulo. And on the other hand, if you could afford it, then dress within your means. Right? Again, dressing, just like we said before, when it comes to dressing, is the most important part of your outer appearance. Right? It talked about having stains and everything. In fact, I forgot to quote the famous Gemara it's at the end of the 8th chapter in Bava Kama. It says, Rabbi Yochanan kara lamane mechobade. Rabbi Yochanan called his clothing his honor. Right? That's the way he felt honor, was by people looking at his clothing. So when it comes to clothing, don't cheap out. You could cheap out on food, but don't cheap out on clothing. Right? Wear something that is, as they say, b'chavadik. And the yichabed ishto uvana v'yoter min haroylo. When it comes to providing, he uses the word yichabed, means literally to honor, but it means to provide for your wife and children beyond what you could afford. Now, that doesn't mean you have to waste all your money on it. We're going to talk about that in the next one. But it just means that spend a little bit more so that your wife and your children feel honored, even if it's breaking the budget just by a little. And that's it.